Today I want to share with you one quick tip that will make your paintings so much more interesting. Sup, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. Today I want to talk to you about a concept I mentioned in the past in one video I did on letting the paint mix on paper. I did a demo with trees, and this time I want to further emphasize how important it is to let the paint mix on paper and not necessarily on the palette even. So if you've been using convenience mixtures like greens, like sap green, and then you want to take it to the next step of mixing your own greens, sometimes it's insufficient to mix them on the palette and then use them and maybe even vary the wash. Sometimes you want to use them pure, okay? So you want to put the yellow pure on paper, then you want to put the blue pure on paper. And what I want to do with this demo is really show you how significant this is. And the number one reason I think for why this is so important is that it better imitates real life. So when you're out there, maybe in a forest, or maybe you see a nice view of trees, even in a city, if you really look up close, you will see that the trees contain so many different colors. There's yellows and blues and kind of all sorts of different greens, especially if it's a very well-lit scene. Sometimes the light shines through the leaves and it creates a very unique yellowish green that is very hard to mimic. So what happens is then someone snaps a picture of that and all of the greens are flattened to just one boring green. That can be sap green or something like that. So what I think is worth aiming for is imitating the way real life looks by leaving a lot of purity of colors on paper. And I'm going to just show you a quick look of what this looks like. We're going to mix that in just a moment. It's just so much better to let it mix on paper sometimes. And now it is a tool. You can choose to avoid it in some parts of the painting or maybe in the entire painting, depending on what you want to convey. So it is not a hard, fast rule, of course, like most of the things. There is a lot of leeway to play with it and change things around. Okay, and I'm going to mention this later on as well. Now, so what I'm going to do is show you why it looks so much better, and then I'm going to give you a demo of these two approaches of letting it mix on paper and really using pure colors, and on the other hand doing the opposite. Okay, and you will see the difference. So anyway, this is, I think, everything I have to tell you right now. We can change the angle and get started. So first I want to show you just how many combinations we can get with very few colors. So I'm going to start out with some phthalo blue here. I'm just going to put it down here. And I'm just gonna work in kind of patches. So I'm just gonna put a bit of the phthalo blue here, and now I'm gonna grab some of the new gamboge, and I'm just gonna add it here, okay? And then, to vary things a little, I'm gonna use some lemon yellow and put that around here. And then maybe we can use some French ultramarine or something like this. Just gonna grab some from the palette. It's a bit grayed, so you'll have to excuse me for that. There we go. And you can just see how by using these kind of random colors, you can get a sense of green. Okay, that's the point. And by letting it mix on paper like that, you create a very interesting result. A very rich, I think, and unique mixture. Okay, so this can be a tree, this can be just about anything. Now you can mix it a bit on the palette, so if I'll do that now, I'm gonna get a straight green straight out of the palette, which is fine. I will show you in just a few moments the difference and just how significant it is to let it mix on paper, okay, because it's super key. So now I'm gonna grab again some ultramarine. I'm just working, so kind of patching my way through this. Going back to maybe some lemon yellow. And this is definitely not boring. It's a really interesting color, and you can vary it. You have a lot of freedom. So If you prefer to use maybe to mix it on the palette like I just showed you, but each time letting some other color be more dominant. So this time the blue is a little more dominant, and then you add a bit more yellow to it. So now the yellow becomes a little stronger, you see. Then you can let the yellow be really the dominant color. So the more I'm gonna add, the more yellow it's gonna become. Get some wet and wet action going, and I think it's a really good practice to have yourself vary your strokes each time. So to take some paint and put it in, and then get used to maybe cleaning the brush or maybe not, and then moving and switching to another one, and you can see the result. And I just think this is exponentially superior to using only paints that were mixed on the palette. Because if I'm gonna just give you a real quick demo of this now. If I'm gonna use this mixture of, again, phthalo and new gamboge, and I'm just gonna cover up the space with it. And imagine that this was everything that I would do. You see, very quickly it becomes a bit boring and repetitive. And even if I will add a bit more darkness to it, it will still be the same color. Now, what I do see a lot of people do that looks great as well is they grab some pure paint and then put it inside the wash, and then you get a bit of variation, you see. And I can grab a bit of blue and put that inside, but here with this one from the get, you get a very rich texture that, if you ask me, and as I mentioned earlier, mimics real life much better. The richness and the vibrancy and the variety of colors that you see out there is much better communicated through this kind of work. Okay, so what I think I'm gonna do now is really give you a demo of some trees. So I'm gonna do some trees that are pure, just the same color, and then I'm gonna do this. And as a bonus, as I don't remember if I mentioned this, I will show you how shading using tonal shading, so just a darker version of the same color versus shading with a different color, really helps create some more interest. Okay. So we've got two sets of trees here, and for one I'm going to use a mixture that has been mixed on a palette. So I'm not using a convenience mixture such as sap green, I am mixing it myself, but I'm just going to use a pretty even wash to cover it all up and add some wet and wets for the shadows. With this one I'm going to feel it by the moment and change things up as I go along, and later on we'll do the shading stage. Let's get started here, and I'm gonna be rather quick about this one. So I'm gonna create a mixture. Let me show you just the mixing. I'm gonna grab some phthalo blue here, and make sure, all I need to do is basically make sure I mix enough. So I have some phthalo blue, then I'm gonna add the new gamboge, and I'm just gonna mix a large enough quantity to make sure I can cover up all the trees. Sometimes you need more paint than you think. So make sure you mix enough. And I think I am pleased with the way this looks. And the light started shining. Let me rearrange that. Okay, yeah. So this is what happens when the sun comes out. So here we go. This is the mixture. And I'm just going to use that and cover up basically everything. So I'm going to start top to bottom like we do in watercolor. And I'm just going to slowly build it up. And I'm not gonna vary the wash at all, okay? I'm just gonna use this, drag this down. The only variation will be all the white kind of spaces that I'm gonna leave in between. And then I'm just gonna go back while it's still wet and add some other details in, okay? So I'm just using this mixture that I created here on my palette. Not creating too much interest. I'm thinking about where I want to have the lights and shadow. Didn't even think about that yet. But in any case, now I got to this point and I want to connect the two washes, because from this point onwards they're going to move together. So I'm just going to drop this tree down, maybe a bit less work on this one, just to balance things out a bit. And here we go, the washes are connected. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to just grab some of the phthalo blue pure. I'm just going to use that to shade in some parts of the trees. Maybe let's agree that light comes, generally speaking, from the top. So we're going to have these shadows in here. Let's not choose a side from which the light comes. And then I'm gonna put some in here. And we'll go back to my mixture, just even it out a bit. And we'll continue dropping the paint down with that. It may not be 100% identical because I did remix some areas, but there you go, you get a basic idea of what it's like. I'm gonna drag this all the way to the bottom, fill up this entire area. This was a bit greener, so I'll add a bit more yellow. And this is basically it. I'm gonna go back once again with some darker paint here, maybe create some differentiation between the trees just by adding a bit of that here and there. Doesn't really matter. We're not going into too many details here. So in any case, these are the two trees. Maybe add a dark shadow under them, something like that. So this is what happens when you mix the colors on the palette, okay? If you ask me, quite a boring result. We're gonna let it dry and then come back with some more light and shadow, but not really something that interesting. And again, it doesn't mimic reality really well. It does mimic images really well that just drop all of the color variation and interest. So for the next one, I'm gonna start out by working just like we did before in kind of patches, okay? So I'm gonna start with a bit of yellow, and I have to be a little slower this time, and the reason is that this is a small painting, generally speaking, and so I want to get the variation in the really micro level, okay? So I'm just gonna put some, this is the mix I used earlier. I'm gonna clean the brush and grab some pure blue here, sorry, and let it all kind of run together. And I'm just really varying it as I go along. Adding a bit of yellow here. Maybe try and dig up some pure yellow and drop it down there. It is important to have the purity of the color preserved. If you just get a contaminated yellow and a contaminated blue, it can affect this or hurt this effect that we're trying to create, okay? So you need to make sure that you have some purity in each of them, and then in the middle kind of mixtures, okay? Now I'm gonna start putting in some shadows maybe here as I go along. I'm gonna use the green mixture we created earlier. And notice how varying the wash gives me maybe even more inclination to take my time with the shape. This is more psychological, it's not like an effect of necessarily this approach or that approach, but it is a nice side effect. Working in patches generally, I noticed that it does encourage you to maybe pay more attention to the finer details. With this one, maybe I'm gonna kill off some of the yellow and use a bit more blue and green just to have it a bit more in the background, okay? And here we kind of connect these two trees. This is where they both connect. And now I can start putting in some even more yellow, I guess, with this one. And you see it started to dry, so we're gonna have some blooms here. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. And again, this is a first wash. I will put another one that's more for the shadows. So just really grabbing whatever comes to my mind. It's really like meditation in many ways, because you kind of just choose one and you really get immersed in it. The one thing I can say about making videos is I'm definitely less immersed in the process just because I have to talk. Which is fine, because I do want to demo this for you. So just so you know, if I would just record this and maybe not even talk, it'll have a different effect. It will have a different feeling to it as well. So in any case, I'm just going to drop this down here all the way to the bottom. And I think the results really are incomparable. This right side is so much more interesting, so much more vibrant, and it's just a better representation of what happens in real life. When the lights and shadows cast different colors on every individual part of an object. So here's a simple example. So you have green trees. Now, near the edges, you have leaves that may be really thin. with thin leaves, light shines through them, creating this very bright green, maybe like the May green, and sometimes even yellow. So you get a lot of variation in the color in real life. Okay, so this is definitely not a representation. This is a much better representation of it, and it just feels better in the grand scheme of things, okay? So what I'm gonna do is let it dry for a few moments, and then we'll come back with another layer or wash for the shadows. And I'm gonna show you how, with this one, I'm gonna use the same mixture basically. It's gonna be really similar to the darker spots here, and add some shadows. Maybe we will choose a direction. I'll think about it, maybe left to right. The light will probably, you know what? The light will probably come from that direction. So I'm gonna let it dry, and then we'll come back here. I'm gonna use a very similar color. Here I'm gonna use a third color that I didn't use here to add some of the shades, okay? And you're gonna see the huge difference it makes. And again, remember, in the grand scheme of a painting, if everything is this way, it's just super boring. And if you have some variety on everything, on the walls of buildings, on people, on anything, if you let it mix like that, it's so much better. So we're gonna let it dry and come back in a moment. So the paint is dry now, and what I want to do is introduce a third color, but we're going to do that in just a moment. First, I want to show you the more monochromatic shading, which is basically similar to what we did earlier. So I'm just going to grab some yellow and some blue now. I just wanted to mention that sometimes this can work fine. Shading that way can produce a desired result, and it really depends on the specific part of the painting and its context within the painting. Meaning, maybe you want to take off some attention from this part or this entire area, and then you would prefer to use more of a tonal shading. Just use the same or a similar color on a darker variation, in a darker variation. Just to take off some of the attention from a part of the work. So it really depends on the context. I'm referring more to a case where that isn't as good when you do this constantly and throughout your entire painting. This can be a problem. So in any case, now I'm going to use some negative painting with the shadow to bring out the shape of the tree on the right. So see, I'm darkening around that. Kind of throwing the lines in there, trying to make it interesting and varied, and really just not boring, basically. But it does get a bit repetitive, especially because we're using the same colors for this entire process. So you will even feel like it's not very interesting at times if you do this too much. So trust your instincts if you feel that way. And try to make it a little more varied. I'm even like without even trying, without even thinking about it, I'm automatically varying it, and I need to stop myself from doing that because I do want to demo what this looks like when you don't vary it as much. By the way, sorry about the change in light conditions. I'm now using natural light, and it's pretty cloudy, so we get the sun is out and then the clouds are back, and then so sorry about that. In any case, this kind of wraps up this example. So you can see a nice strong contrast. Maybe for the bottom part, I will make this shadow a bit larger. Just close it off a bit. So here you see this, not the most interesting thing, definitely. Now I have these leftovers of blue and yellow. I'm gonna mix them all together. Okay, but the one ingredient I will introduce into this mixture, I think, will be quinacridone rose. Okay, so once I'm gonna put that in here, what's gonna happen is, and we can even use the carbazole violet that I showed you in the paint show, but in any case, you know what, let's even put a bit of that here. Let's see what happens. So now I'm using kind of a more purplish violet mixture to shade, and I will vary that as well, okay, because I want to show you a more interesting way of doing things. So once again, starting off with the tree on the left. The reason why it's just more comfortable for me to work left to right in this instance. Closing off some gaps here. And what you want to make sure you do is preserve some of the uniqueness of the pure colors. So don't cover up all of the yellows, for example, if you can control it, and leave some of the highlights there, just to make sure that it is a little more interesting. So now I'm adding a bit more of the carbazole violet, and you may not feel the result immediately, or it may be a very subtle effect. I'm going to use a pure carbazole violet, in fact, here. It may be a subtle result, but trust me, when this dries, it's gonna come through. You're gonna feel the difference in the approaches. It can be a staggering difference, really. So now I'm gonna use a bit of a pure carbazole violet here. Maybe add a bit of quinacridone rose. Put in some of these details. And you can see the amount of interest here is so much stronger, I think, and it's just better if you can shade with colors that aren't the original color. By the way, probably not all of the intricacies and details of the color come through due to the camera. I do want to upgrade and get a better one that may be able to show the colors better, but even with that, it's probably gonna show some things off because it's just not the same as being here and seeing this in real life. But in any case, doing the best we can here. So I'm gonna just drop this down here, maybe connect some of these, move this downwards, close off some of these gaps, because the lower you go, the shadows tend to be a little more dominant. And I'm gonna push the contrast here a little more. So you can see here two very different results, and I even shaded quite a lot of that. I could use scarcer, like just the bottom parts. And this one to me is so much more interesting than this one. It just has more variety. Here I also varied the wash, the second wash as well, a little more than this one. I don't know, I do feel like maybe I should have shaded just a little less in this area, but that's fine. You can see some of the vibrancy here in the yellow, and it does come through. So this is basically what I wanted to show you, and again, this imitates real life, and this is why I love this so much. It really shows you how in nature there's always a larger variety of paints, of colors than we can perceive with an image taken. Okay, and our eyes can discern that, and which is why it's so much better to paint from real life and on location than it is from a picture. But even if you're using a picture, you can use this technique or this way of varying the wash to create the effect of you painting from real life. Okay, so this is it. I really hope you enjoyed this little lesson. Let's change the angle, and I'm gonna conclude and wrap up this video. So this is it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned something new. Maybe this is something you were already aware of, but seeing it better maybe explained in more details will make you try it out, or maybe try and make a change in the way you work. By the way, one really good example of an artist that does this really well is Patrick here on YouTube. I'm gonna put a link to in the description box. Patrick Lee Greaves. He hasn't published a video in a long time, but I really love his stuff. I hope he's doing fine. He is a master of letting different colors mix on paper and using them purely. And the name of his channel is Pure Watercolor as well, so that makes a lot of sense. I think he's a really good example of doing this because when you look at his work, you can tell the individual paints. You don't have to try even, you can just see them in front of you. Now, just a quick example of someone that's not doing that. That is, if you look at Joseph's book, which, for example, he tends to mix a lot of grays in his work. He does have pure yellows and reds and even greens somewhere, but for the most part it's gray. So this just goes to show you that you can do things in very different ways and still have them work in the great context of things. You just have to use the rules and break the rules from a place of a deliberate choice, I guess. Not because you got used to something, but because you saw how it works for you and you realize that it works well for you. Now I will put a link in the description box for all of the colors that I used in this video. I mentioned this already. It's affiliate links. Basically, you click them, you get to Amazon if you want to purchase the paint or any other things that I link to. You pay the same price, I get a commission, so that works out pretty nicely. So in any case, if you want to purchase like the Phthalo Blue or the New Gamboge that I used here, or the Lemon Yellow, or the French Ultramarine, or even the Carbazole Violet and all the other mixes, I will put a link to everything in the description box below. This is it. If you still haven't subscribed, don't forget to do that. Follow me on Instagram and Snapchat for cool updates, more live things. I also I talked about Patreon a few times, so check it out, my Patreon page. Everything is going to be in the description box, the podcast as well. I want to thank you so much for listening, for learning, for commenting, for liking, for everything, for all of this support. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you again in the next video really soon.